The morning she called to ask if I'd tried the chocolates, her voice had that careful quality, too steady, too polite, like someone reading from a script they'd rehearsed too many times. "Did you enjoy them, Gerald? The ones I left on the porch?" I paused, just long enough to make her wait. "Oh, those," I said. "I gave them to my accountant. She brought them home for her grandkids. Said they loved every piece." Silence. 3 full seconds of it. Then, "You what?" "Gerald, those were expensive. I ordered them specially for you." "That's very kind of you," I said. "Margaret will be touched when I tell her." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat by the window and watched the snow come down over the backyard, the same yard where my son used to build forts every February, where his father taught him to skate on the rink we flooded every December, where 41 years of this family had quietly taken root. The chocolates were sitting on my kitchen counter, unopened, exactly where I'd left them. I hadn't given them to anyone, but the panic in her voice told me everything I needed to know. Let me take you back to where this really started, because it didn't begin with chocolates. It began the way most quiet disasters do, with something small that didn't quite add up. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a forensic accountant with a firm in Ottawa before I retired, and before that, I did 2 years of financial crimes consulting with the RCMP. I know what fraud smells like. I know how people hide money, forge documents, and rewrite histories to suit what they want. I spent a career learning to see the small things that don't fit. My wife, Diane, passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the warmest person I have ever known, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept a notebook of her grandchildren's favorite foods, who cried at commercials, and never once apologized for it. When she died, she took a particular kind of light out of this house. I won't pretend otherwise. My son, Colin, is 41. He lives 20 minutes away in Canada with his wife, Renata, and their daughter, Sophie, who is 8 years old, and the most important person in my life. Sophie has Diane's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that I used to call November Lake, and she has her grandmother's habit of collecting small, beautiful things, smooth stones, pressed leaves, feathers, bottle caps with interesting colors. When she comes to visit, she always brings something for what she calls our museum, which is a shelf in my study where we keep her finds next to Diane's old reading glasses and a photograph of the 4 of us at Sandbanks Provincial Park. Sophie, maybe 3 years old, squinting into the sun. Colin is a good man. I want to be clear about that. He works hard, he loves his daughter, and he carries his grief about his mother quietly, the way men of his generation were taught to. Our relationship has always been solid, if not especially expressive. We watch hockey together. We argue about the Senators. We do not say "I love you" out loud very often, but it's there. I know it is. Renata is a different matter. I want to be fair here, because fairness is something I've always believed in. When Colin first brought her home 8 years ago, I tried. Diane tried harder. Renata is from a wealthy family in Calgary. Her father made a significant amount of money in oil and gas before selling his company, and she came into our family with a particular set of assumptions about how things should be done. Not malicious, not then, just different. She expected a certain kind of deference that our family wasn't built around. Diane used to say, "She'll soften," and maybe she would have, if Diane had lived long enough to see it. After Diane died, something shifted. It was small at first. Renata started joining Colin on visits more often, which was fine, welcome, even. But the nature of the visits changed. She began asking questions about the house. Offhand, casual questions. The kind that are designed to sound like conversation, but are actually reconnaissance. "Have you thought about downsizing, Gerald? This place must be a lot to maintain on your own. My cousin works in real estate properties in this area. Have really gone up, haven't they? Colin mentioned your back has been bothering you. It might be time to think about something more manageable." I answered her pleasantly and changed the subject every time. Then, about 2 years ago, she started coming alone. Colin travels occasionally for work. He's a project manager for a civil engineering firm, and there are site visits that take him out of the city for 3 or 4 days at a stretch. During those trips, Renata began stopping by on her own, ostensibly to check on me, to bring groceries, to see if I needed anything. I appreciated it, or tried to, but I noticed, gradually, that she always found reasons to be in my study. A book she was curious about, a photo she wanted to show Sophie, a document she needed to print because our printer is acting up. I keep my important papers in a fireproof lockbox in the study closet. I also keep a filing cabinet with older documents, tax returns, property records, Diane's medical files, that kind of thing. I noticed, after her third or fourth visit, that the cabinet drawer was not quite closed the way I leave it. I'm precise about these things. 32 years of forensic work will do that. I didn't say anything. I just started paying closer attention. The chocolates appeared on a Tuesday in March, 8 months ago, on my 67th birthday. A beautiful box, dark ribbon, the name of a boutique shop in the Glebe, printed on the side. Renata had left them on the porch with a card that said, "Happy birthday, Gerald. Thinking of you." Renata and Colin. Colin texted separately to say happy birthday, and mentioned he hadn't known about the chocolates, that Renata had organized it on her own. Something made me not open them. I have tried to examine that instinct honestly, because it wasn't based on anything concrete at the time. It was more of a feeling the accumulated weight of small things that hadn't sat right, added up over 2 years. The questions about the house, the visits to the study, the cabinet drawer, the way her warmth toward me had increased in direct proportion to my growing financial independence. After Diane's death, I'd managed our investments well, and the house in Westboro had appreciated considerably. I put the chocolates in a bag and drove them to my accountant's office. Her name is Patricia Pat, and we've worked together for 11 years. She's one of the sharpest people I know, and she has a forensic background of her own. I didn't explain much, just asked her to have them tested quietly. She looked at me with that particular expression she reserves for when she thinks I'm being paranoid, and then she looked at me again and said, "I'll make some calls." 3 days later, she phoned me. "Gerald." Her voice was careful. The chocolates had something in them. 3 of the bottom layer had been injected small needle marks on the underside. Very neat. The lab found aconitine. I sat down. Aconitine is derived from monkshood, a plant that grows wild in parts of British Columbia and is sold as an ornamental in garden centers across Canada without much restriction. In the right concentration, it causes cardiac arrhythmia. In someone my age, with a history of mild hypertension, which Renata would have known about, because she'd been present at enough family dinners where the subject came up, it could very easily present as a heart attack. "How much?" I asked. "Enough to be serious," Pat said. "Possibly enough to be fatal, depending on how many you ate." I thanked her and hung up the phone. Then I sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking at the backyard. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I need you to understand why, because it's the question I've been asked most often since. I was a financial crimes consultant. I know exactly what happens when you bring an accusation to police without airtight documentation. The investigation goes sideways. Evidence gets challenged. Someone's lawyer argues contamination or mishandling, and the case collapses. I had one piece of evidence, chocolates that had been in my possession, with a chain of custody that a skilled defense attorney could pick apart. What I needed was a pattern. I also needed to understand the full scope of what she was planning, because aconitine in birthday chocolates didn't make sense as a standalone act. If she wanted me gone, she needed something to gain, and what she would gain, the house, the investments, Colin's inheritance, was only accessible if there was a legal framework already in place to capture it, which meant, if she'd been thorough, there was something else, something on paper. I called my lawyer, a man named Douglas Firth, who has handled my family's legal work for 20 years. I asked him to pull my will and go through it carefully. He called back the next morning. "Gerald, when did you update your will?" "I haven't touched it since 2019, I said. "After Diane died." "That's what I thought," he said, "because I'm looking at a document dated last October that significantly changes your beneficiary structure. It moves primary inheritance away from a trust for Sophie and toward Colin directly, with a clause that, in the event of Colin's incapacity or death, everything passes to his spouse." I wrote down every word he said. "That's not my signature," I told him. "I know," he said quietly. "Gerald, I need you to come in." I drove to Douglas's office on a Thursday afternoon in early April. He had the document laid out on his desk, a careful forgery, professional quality, using what appeared to be a notarized signature. The notary stamp was from a service in Gatineau. The date was October 14th of last year. I had been in Montreal on October 14th at a conference for retired financial professionals. I had hotel receipts, registration records, and a photograph from the dinner on the 14th that put me 180 kilometers away from wherever that document was signed. I had an alibi for the signing of my own forged will. Douglas and I sat in his office for 2 hours and mapped out what we believed had happened. Renata had access to my study, access to old documents with my signature, and we learned later a connection to a document services company in Gatineau that had recently been flagged by the Law Society of Ontario for irregular notarization practices. She had been building this methodically over at least a year. The forged will was the legal architecture. The chocolates were meant to be the final act. What she hadn't counted on was that I'm a forensic accountant who spent 30 years catching exactly this kind of thing. I want to tell you about Sophie because she matters to this story more than anything else. Sophie doesn't know most of what I'm about to describe. She's 8. She should be thinking about her rock collection and her best friend from school and whether the Senators are going to make the playoffs. But I noticed, in the months before all of this came to light, that something was changing in how she acted when she visited. She was quieter, more careful about what she said. She stopped bringing things for our museum without explanation, and when I asked her about it, she looked at the floor and said, "Maman said the museum stuff is a bit babyish now." Renata had been working on Sophie too, slowly repositioning her, pulling her away from me, softening the bond, making herself the center of Sophie's world. It was the kind of thing that's very hard to prove and very easy to deny, but I recognized it for what it was. I made a decision then, before any of the legal process had concluded, to make sure Sophie knew that our museum was hers, that the shelf wasn't going anywhere, and that she was welcome in my house every single day for the rest of her life. I didn't explain why. I just said, "I hope you know that nothing about this changes. You and I, Sophie, that doesn't change." She looked at me for a moment and then she hugged me around the middle with both arms, the way she'd done since she was small enough to reach. "I know, Grandpa," she said. "That was enough. That was everything. Now I need to tell you about the conversation with Colin, because it was the hardest part of this whole business." Colin didn't know? I am certain of that. I have run the evidence in my mind more times than I can count, and there is nothing, not a single document, not a single communication, not one piece of testimony from anyone involved in the subsequent investigation that suggests Colin knew what his wife was doing. He was being used as much as I was. The forged will benefited him, yes, but Renata had structured it cleverly. The ultimate beneficiary, in the event of Colin's death or incapacity, was her. Colin was a conduit, not a conspirator. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning in early May, when Sophie was at a birthday party and Renata was at a yoga class. I asked Colin to sit down at the kitchen table. I put a folder in front of him. I didn't say anything for a moment, just let him open it. He went through the documents slowly. The forged will, the lab report on the chocolates, Douglas's legal analysis, Pat's financial audit, which had also by that point uncovered small, irregular transfers, nothing dramatic, just a pattern of small amounts moving from a joint account I'd been unaware of toward an account registered to a numbered company. Colin didn't speak for a long time. When he finally looked up, his face was something I don't have the right words for. It wasn't just shock. It was the particular devastation of someone realizing that the person they trusted most in the world is not who they believed them to be. "Dad," he said, and then he stopped. "I know," I said. "The chocolates." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm okay," I said. "I didn't eat them. I had them tested first." He put his head in his hands. We sat there for a while. I didn't try to fill the silence. Some things need space to settle before words can get near them. Outside, a cardinal was doing something insistent in the cedar hedge. The coffee I'd made sat cooling between us. Eventually, Colin asked what I needed from him. I told him, full cooperation with Douglas and with the police, who were now involved, documentation of everything he could recall, and one more thing I needed him to think carefully, for Sophie's sake, about what came next. He nodded. He understood. The police investigation that followed was thorough and, I'll be honest, faster than I expected. The evidence Pat and Douglas had assembled was substantial enough that the Crown Prosecutor's office moved quickly. The numbered company traced back to a name connected to Renata through a Calgary business network. The Gatineau Notary Service, under investigation by the Law Society, cooperated in exchange for reduced sanctions. A woman who worked at the boutique chocolate shop in the Glebe confirmed that a woman matching Renata's description had come in 3 weeks before my birthday, purchased the box, taken it away, and returned 2 days later to retrieve it, something that struck the employee as unusual enough to remember. Renata was arrested in June, at the house in Canada, on a Tuesday morning. Colin had moved Sophie to his sister's place in Orleans the night before. Sophie thought it was a sleepover. She brought her collection bag and her favorite book about Canadian birds. My niece made pancakes, and they watched a movie, and Sophie fell asleep on the couch. She didn't see the police cars. She didn't see her mother let out in handcuffs. She was eating pancakes. I am grateful for that more than I can say. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Renata faced charges of attempted murder, fraud, and forgery, the full weight of what she'd done laid out in a courtroom downtown, methodically, document by document. Her defense argued that the chocolates were a coincidence, that the aconitine had entered the supply chain through contamination, that the will was a document she'd been asked to have notarized on my behalf. Every argument collapsed under the evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day. She was convicted on all charges. Sentencing will come in the spring. Colin filed for divorce before the trial concluded. It was the right decision, and it was his to make. I didn't push him toward it. He came to it on his own, in his own time, the way he handles most things quietly, with more resolve than most people would expect from someone who smiles as easily as he does. Sophie is doing well. She's seeing a child counselor, a wonderful woman in Nepean who specializes in family disruption, and the sessions seem to be helping. Sophie doesn't always talk about what she's processing, but she shows it in other ways. Last month she brought 3 new items for our museum: a piece of green sea glass she found at a beach near Kingston, a small brass button from a coat that had been her grandmother's, and a handwritten note that said, in her careful printing, "For Grandpa, our museum forever." I put it in the center of the shelf. It's February now, and I've been sitting with all of this long enough to start to understand it, not forgive it, not yet, maybe not ever, but understand it in the way that you eventually understand most things that happen to you in a long life. Renata was not a monster in the way we imagine monsters to be. She was a person who wanted something: security, money, control, and who told herself, probably over years, that the obstacles between her and those things were negotiable, that I was negotiable, that her own daughter's grandfather was an acceptable casualty. That's not madness. That's a choice, and choices have consequences. That's the thing she miscalculated most badly, not the forensic trail, not the witness at the chocolate shop, not my habit of keeping careful records. She miscalculated the consequences of her choices, because she had spent too long believing that careful people could be fooled. I have been a careful person my entire adult life. I learned it from my work, and I learned it from my father, who was a quiet man with a precise mind, and I learned it from 40 years of marriage to a woman who taught me that paying attention is one of the deepest forms of love. When you pay attention to people, really pay attention, you see them. You see what they need, what they fear, what they're hiding. Diane paid attention to everyone she met, and they felt it. They felt seen. I suppose, in the end, Renata felt seen too, just not in the way she intended. The cardinal is back in the cedar hedge this morning. Sophie is coming for lunch on Saturday. She's going to bring something for the museum. She texted me a photograph of a small piece of quartz she found on a trail near her dad's apartment and asked if it was museum quality. I told her it absolutely was. I put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow come down on the backyard, the same way I've watched it come down for 41 years. The maple near the fence that Colin planted as a school project when he was 9. The skating rink that I won't flood this year because my back won't allow it, but that I'll flood again next year when I've rested. The bench where Diane used to sit with her coffee on mornings exactly like this one. I'm still here. That's not a small thing. I know that now more than I did a year ago. Being here, being present, being careful, being paying attention is not a passive act. It's a choice you make every single day, as deliberate as anything else you do. And the people who count on you to make it, the Sophies of your life, the ones who bring you sea glass and press their faces against the window when they arrive, they need you to keep making it. So you do. You pay attention. You trust slowly and verify always. You keep your records. You ask the questions that don't have comfortable answers, and you protect the people who cannot protect themselves. And when someone hands you a box of chocolates with a little too much warmth in their eyes, you listen to the quiet voice that's been doing this work longer than you have. Then you call your accountant. There is something I want to say directly to anyone watching this, who might be in a similar situation, who is older, who lives alone, who has felt that particular unease when someone close to them starts paying a little too much attention to their finances or their home or their health. Please hear this. You are not paranoid for paying attention. You are not being cruel for asking questions. You are not causing trouble by protecting what you've spent a lifetime building. Elder financial abuse is one of the most underreported crimes in Canada, not because it doesn't happen, but because it most often happens inside families, where the shame of it makes people go quiet. Don't go quiet. Talk to your lawyer. Talk to your accountant. Talk to someone outside the situation who can look at the facts without the emotional weight that makes these things so hard to see clearly. Document everything: dates, conversations, visits, anything that doesn't sit right. Your instincts, built over decades of living in the world, are not nothing. They are data. And the people who love you, really love you, will not be offended by your caution. They will be glad you're protecting yourself, because what they want, more than any inheritance, more than any property or account balance, is for you to still be here, still paying attention, still putting the kettle on in the morning and watching the snow come down on the backyard. That's everything. That's always been everything.